The lace veil swayed gently in the breeze as Kendra Holmes descended the steps of St. Luke's Baptist Church in Richmond. Caleb Porter held her hand tightly, smiling at the guests who showered them with rose petals. 25 years ago, she could never have imagined that she would marry a preacher, but today she felt like the happiest woman on earth. The sun was shining brightly, even though the October air was cool, and Kendra thanked her lucky stars that their wedding day was so clear and cloudless. "Congratulations, sis." Rena Holmes was the first to approach them, hugging Kendra so tightly that she almost suffocated from the cloud of perfume. "Caleb, welcome to the family." Rena had been working as a medical technician at the city clinic for 6 years and had always been proud of her profession. At 28, she had never married, preferring her career to family life. Kendra often teased her sister, saying that she spent too much time with sick people and had forgotten how to interact with healthy ones. Today, Rena looked particularly elegant in a dark blue suit that accentuated her slim figure, but there was a tense expression on her face, which Kendra attributed to her sister's excitement. "Thank you, Rena. I'll take good care of your sister." Caleb shook her hand, and Kendra noticed his fingers tremble slightly. He had seemed a little nervous all day, which was understandable. Even the most confident men get nervous on their wedding day. He adjusted his tie several times during the ceremony, and Kendra saw him discreetly wipe his palms on his pants when he thought no one was looking. Pastor Jerome Mitchell approached them, his arms outstretched for a hug. At 55, he was still an energetic man with graying temples and kind brown eyes. He was the one who married them today, and Kendra was grateful that the ceremony was performed by a man who had known Caleb since childhood. Pastor Mitchell was not only a mentor to Caleb, but almost a father, especially after Caleb's real parents died so early. "Caleb, my son, I am so proud of you." The pastor hugged the young preacher. "Kendra, dear, you have a wonderful husband. He is one of the best people I know." Kendra smiled, feeling her cheeks flush. She had met Caleb a year ago when she came to church at the request of a friend. He was leading a youth service at the time, and his words about forgiveness and love touched her so deeply that she returned the following week. Then again. A month later, he invited her for coffee. Their relationship developed slowly and cautiously. Caleb was very sensitive and never rushed things. Kendra thought it was because of his religious beliefs, and she respected him for his restraint. "Pastor Mitchell, without you, none of this would have been possible," Caleb said gratefully, shaking his mentor's hand. "You taught me everything I know about ministry and love." "You learned everything yourself, my boy. I just guided you." The pastor patted Caleb on the shoulder. "And now you have a life partner who will help you become even better." The guests began to disperse to their cars, preparing to drive to the restaurant for the banquet. Kendra worked as an accountant in a small firm and had been saving for the wedding for 2 years, but still had to settle for a modest celebration. Caleb earned a small salary at the church, and his parents had died when he was 20, leaving him no inheritance. They decided to spend their money on a nice restaurant and beautiful dresses rather than on ostentatious luxuries they couldn't afford. The guests were mostly churchgoers, a few of Kendra's colleagues, and friends they had made during their time together. About 40 people. Not too many, but for them, these were the people closest and dearest to them. Kendra looked at the faces of the guests and felt warmth in her chest from the fact that all these people had come to share their joy. "Kendra, you look so beautiful today." Aunt Dorothy, their late mother's sister, approached them, leaning on her cane. "Your mother would be so happy to see you find love." Kendra felt a lump in her throat. Her parents had died in a car accident 3 years ago while on their way to her birthday party. Since then, Rena had become her only close relative, and today it was her sister who was supposed to give her away. Aunt Dorothy lived in another state and rarely visited, but today she had flown in especially for the wedding, which touched Kendra deeply. "Thank you, Aunt Dorothy." "Mom really dreamed of seeing me happily married." Kendra recalled how her mother always told her that the most important thing in life was to find a decent man who would love and respect her. Her mother was a very religious woman, and always dreamed that her daughters would marry good men. "Caleb, young man, take good care of our girl," Aunt Dorothy said to the groom. "She is very special to us." "Of course, ma'am. I will do everything I can to make Kendra happy." Caleb bowed politely to the elderly woman. The celebration at the restaurant was warm and heartfelt. Caleb gave a speech, thanking everyone for their support and talking about how much he loved Kendra. His voice trembled slightly as he recounted how they met and how she changed his life. Kendra noticed that he was adjusting his tie and glancing at his watch from time to time, but decided not to draw attention to it. Men generally don't like long celebrations, and Caleb had always been quite shy in large groups. The music played softly, the waiters served the food, and the guests chatted animatedly at their tables. Kendra felt like a princess in her snow-white dress, which she had spent so long choosing. It was a simple but elegant silk design, without unnecessary embellishments, but very feminine and romantic. Caleb couldn't take his eyes off her all evening, which made her heart beat faster. "Are you happy?" Rena asked when they were left alone at the table while the other guests danced. "Very. Caleb is so kind and understanding. I feel protected when I'm with him." Kendra looked at her husband, who was talking to Pastor Mitchell about some church business. "He's always so caring and attentive. The main thing is that he doesn't disappoint you." Rena took a sip of champagne. Men know how to hide their true nature until after the wedding. Kendra looked at her sister in surprise. Rena wasn't usually so pessimistic about men. Perhaps working in a hospital had taught her not to trust people too quickly. Or maybe she had had an unfortunate experience in a relationship that she preferred not to talk about. "Rena, what do you mean? Caleb is an open book. I know everything about him." Kendra took her sister's hand. "We discussed our views on life, plans for the future, even talked about children." "I hope so." Rena squeezed her fingers. "Just take care of yourself, okay? If something goes wrong, you can always come to me." "What are you talking about? What could go wrong?" Kendra frowned. "Nothing specific, just mother's intuition." Rena smiled, but the smile seemed forced to Kendra. "Forget it. It's your day, and you should be happy." Around 10 o'clock in the evening, the newlyweds finally arrived at their new home on the outskirts of Richmond. Caleb had bought it last year with a bank loan. The small 2-story house with 3 bedrooms and a small garden seemed to Kendra the embodiment of her dream of family happiness. She could already imagine them having breakfast together in the kitchen, planting flowers in the garden, and entertaining guests in the cozy living room. The house was furnished quite modestly, but tastefully. Caleb bought furniture gradually, and Kendra helped him choose some things. She already felt like the mistress of this house and looked forward to the moment when she could finally move here from her small apartment. "Welcome home, Mrs. Porter," Caleb said, lifting her up and carrying her over the threshold. Kendra laughed, feeling like the heroine of a romantic movie. The whole day had been like a fairy tale, and now their first night together as husband and wife awaited them. She was a little nervous because she and Caleb had never gone beyond kissing and hugging. He always said he wanted to wait until they were married, and she respected his principles. "I'm going to take a shower and change into something more comfortable," she said, heading for the stairs. "Okay, honey. I'll change too." Caleb kissed her on the cheek. "Take your time." Kendra went up to the bedroom and began to take off her wedding dress. The process turned out to be more difficult than she thought. Lots of buttons and hooks required caution. She carefully hung the dress in the closet, then took off her shoes and massaged her tired feet. She had spent the whole day in high heels, and now her feet ached from the unusual strain. She loosened her hair, which had been pinned up in a complicated hairstyle, and combed it with long strokes. A happy woman with shining eyes looked back at her in the mirror. Kendra removed her makeup, washed her face with cool water, and put on the snow-white nightgown she had bought especially for this day. The silk fabric glided pleasantly over her skin, and she felt incredibly feminine. When she went downstairs, she didn't find Caleb in the living room. There were 2 half-finished cups of tea on the kitchen table, and dirty dishes that they hadn't had time to wash before the wedding that morning were in the sink. Kendra decided to leave the cleaning for tomorrow. Today was their special day. Perhaps Caleb had already gone up to the bedroom. Kendra climbed the stairs and pushed open the bedroom door. What she saw made her freeze in her tracks, and her breath caught as if she had been splashed in the face with ice water. Caleb was standing with his back to her in the middle of the room near the bed, wearing only a diaper. It was a regular adult diaper, the kind worn by elderly people or patients with incontinence. White, with Velcro fasteners on the sides, it looked ridiculous on the body of a 30-year-old man. "Caleb?" She whispered his name, hoping she had imagined it. He spun around, his face turning so pale it was almost gray. For a few seconds, they just stared at each other in complete silence. In Caleb's eyes, she saw horror, shame, and something else she couldn't quite identify. "Kendra, I can explain." He took a step toward her, reaching out his hands, but she instinctively backed away. "What is this? Why are you wearing a diaper?" She tried to remain calm, even though her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to jump out of her chest. Her thoughts were jumbled, and she couldn't understand what was happening. Caleb stood in front of her, clearly struggling with himself. His hands trembled as he slowly pulled at the Velcro fasteners on the diaper. The sound of the tape tearing seemed deafening to Kendra in the silence of the bedroom. When the diaper fell to the floor, she saw something that changed her perception of her husband forever. Between his legs, there was nothing resembling normal male genitalia, only a tiny appendage, no bigger than a child's finger, surrounded by folds of skin. It looked as if nature had forgotten to finish its work. "My God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "I have a micro-penis." Caleb sat down on the edge of the bed without looking up. His voice sounded hollow and hopeless. "A congenital developmental anomaly. I was born this way." Kendra sank into a chair by the window, feeling her legs buckle. She didn't know what to say. Her thoughts were jumbled, and she couldn't believe what was happening. The man she was going to spend the rest of her life with had hidden something so important from her. In kindergarten, the other kids laughed at me when we changed clothes or went to the bathroom. Caleb continued in a quiet voice, staring at the floor. They pointed at each other, compared themselves, and when they saw me, they started laughing. They said I was a girl. Kendra listened, feeling her insides churn. She tried to imagine little Caleb having to endure such bullying. "I refused to take off my diaper even at home," he continued, still not looking up. "Mom cried, Dad yelled, they took me to psychologists, but nothing helped. I just couldn't. Every time someone tried to make me take my clothes off, I would throw a tantrum." "Why didn't you tell me?" Kendra finally found her voice. "We dated for a whole year. We were going to get married. How could you hide this from me?" "How could I?" Caleb looked up at her, his eyes full of tears. "We were dating. I was falling more and more in love with you, and you were so beautiful and confident. I was afraid you would run away as soon as you found out the truth." He got up from the bed and walked over to the window, wrapping his arms around himself. "It was even worse at school." He wiped his face with his hand. "The boys teased me, called me a girl, a freak. I never went to the communal shower after gym class. I made up excuses, said I was sick, that I forgot my gym clothes. The teachers thought I was just very shy." Kendra looked at his back and tried to comprehend the magnitude of what she had learned. Their entire relationship was built on lies. All those moments when he said he wanted to wait until marriage, when he refused intimacy, citing religious beliefs. It was all a deception. "What about the diapers?" She nodded at the object that had fallen on the floor. "Do you still wear them?" Caleb turned to her, and there was so much pain in his eyes that Kendra felt a pang of pity. At first, it was a necessity. Then it became a habit. And in my teens, it became part of me, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I can't do without them. They make me feel safe, secure. Are you saying it's some kind of fetish? Kendra felt the blood rush to her face. Not exactly a fetish, Caleb shook his head. More like a psychological dependency. Without a diaper, I feel defenseless, vulnerable. It's as if everyone sees me as that little boy they used to laugh at. He walked over to the dresser and took his pajamas out of the drawer. I've tried to get rid of it, many times. I've seen psychologists try different methods, but nothing helped. As soon as I take off my diaper for a long time, I start to panic. And you thought you could just hide it from me your whole life? There was a note of anger in Kendra's voice. What would have happened on our wedding night? How were you going to explain to me that we couldn't be intimate? Caleb began to put on his pajamas, trying not to look at her. I hoped that marriage would change me, he said, sitting back down on the bed. That loving you would help me get rid of it. That being with you would make me normal. Caleb, this isn't something you can just get rid of if you want to. Kendra stood up and walked over to the window. This is a serious psychological problem, and a physical one too. She looked out at the dark street and tried to collect her thoughts. Outside the window, everything was as calm and normal as ever, but in their bedroom, the world they had been building for a whole year was falling apart. What about the children? She asked suddenly without turning around. We talked about children. You wanted to have a family. I hoped there would be some way. Caleb's voice grew even quieter. Maybe artificial insemination or something else. You thought about it without consulting me? Kendra turned to face him. You made a decision for both of us without even asking my opinion? They were silent for several minutes. Lights shone outside the window, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. It was a normal, peaceful night in the suburbs, but in their bedroom, a disaster was unfolding. I love you, Kendra. That's the most honest thing I can say, Caleb said quietly. Everything else was a lie, but love wasn't. And I don't even know who I love, she turned to him. It turns out I didn't know everything about my husband. You could say, I knew almost nothing. What happens now? He asked, fear in his voice. Kendra looked at him for a long time. This man had deceived her for a whole year, hiding such an important part of himself. But at the same time, she saw his pain and shame and understood what he had gone through. Childhood trauma does not go away without a trace, and he had suffered his whole life from what he was born with. I don't know, Caleb, she said slowly, heading for the door. I need time to think about everything. This is too much for one day. Kendra, please, he said, getting out of bed. Don't go. Let's talk. Talk about what? She asked, stopping at the door. You lied to me about the most important thing. How can I trust you now? I know I did the wrong thing. He took a step toward her. But I was afraid of losing you. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'll sleep in the guest room. She didn't respond to his words. We'll talk tomorrow when I've had time to recover. He nodded without looking up. Kendra left the bedroom and closed the door behind her. Kendra woke up at 6:30 in the morning from the bright sunlight shining through the thin curtains of the guest room. She had spent the night on a narrow couch, barely sleeping, and now felt broken and tired. The events of the previous evening seemed like a bad dream, but the pain in her stiff neck and the bitterness in her mouth reminded her that it had all happened in reality. She slowly got up from the couch, stretched her stiff muscles, and listened to the sounds in the house. It was quiet upstairs. Caleb was probably still asleep. Kendra knew they had a serious conversation ahead of them, but she wasn't ready for it yet. She needed to collect her thoughts and decide what to do next. Kendra went down to the kitchen, intending to make coffee. The automatic movements helped her not to think about what had happened. She opened the coffee can, poured it into the coffee maker filter, and poured water. A few minutes later, the kitchen was filled with the familiar aroma that she usually associated with a cozy morning, but today it only emphasized the unreality of the situation. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, looking out the window at the quiet morning street. The neighbors were already leaving for work, and life was going on as usual, as if nothing had changed. But for Kendra, the world had turned upside down overnight. Around 8 in the morning, she decided it was time to talk to Caleb. No matter how painful their relationship was now, they needed to decide what to do next. Kendra went upstairs and knocked softly on the bedroom door. "Caleb, are you awake?" Silence was the only answer. She carefully opened the door and peeked into the bedroom. The bed was empty and neatly made. Apparently, Caleb had gotten up even earlier and had already left. Kendra walked through the house, checking every room, but Caleb was nowhere to be found. Going downstairs to the study on the first floor, where Caleb usually prepared his sermons and read religious literature, Kendra pushed the door open and froze in the doorway. Caleb was sitting in his chair at his desk, leaning back with his eyes closed. A cup of coffee stood on the table next to his hand. "Caleb?" she called, but he didn't answer. Kendra moved closer and realized something was wrong. Her husband's face was pale, almost gray, and she couldn't hear him breathing. She touched his hand. His skin was cold. "Caleb." She shook his shoulder, but his body swayed lifelessly in the chair. Kendra recoiled, pressing her hand to her chest. Her heart was pounding so hard she was afraid she would faint. Caleb was dead. Her husband, with whom she had quarreled the night before, would never open his eyes again. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and dialed the emergency number. "Hello, this is 911. What's the emergency?" a calm, female voice asked. "My husband. He's dead," Kendra managed to say. "Please come quickly." "Ma'am, please give me your address," the dispatcher said in a more formal tone. Kendra gave the address and answered a few questions about Caleb's condition and the circumstances under which she had found him. The dispatcher said that an ambulance and the police would be there in 10 minutes and asked her not to touch the body or move anything in the room. Kendra left the office and sat down on the steps in the hallway. She couldn't believe what was happening. Just yesterday, they had been happy newlyweds, even though they had discovered a serious problem in their relationship. And now Caleb was dead, and she didn't even know why. A few minutes later, sirens sounded outside the house. Kendra opened the door and let the ambulance crew in. 2 paramedics went into the study, examined Caleb, and confirmed his death. They were followed by the police, 2 uniformed officers, and a plainclothes detective. Detective Trace Adams was a tall black man in his early 40s, with graying, short-cropped hair and attentive brown eyes. He introduced himself to Kendra in a calm but professional tone and asked her to describe how she had discovered the body. "Mrs. Porter, I understand this is a difficult time for you, but I need to ask you a few questions," the detective said, taking out a notebook. "When was the last time you saw your husband alive?" "Last night, around 11, Kendra said, sitting down in the living room where it was brighter and less scary. "We had an argument, and I went to sleep in another room." "What was the argument about?" Adams looked at her intently. Kendra hesitated. She couldn't tell a stranger about the intimate nightmare that had unfolded before her the day before. It was too personal and humiliating. "Family problems," she replied evasively. "Nothing serious, just the usual disagreements between newlyweds." "I see," the detective wrote something down in his notebook. "And when did you discover the body?" "Around 8 in the morning. I was looking for Caleb around the house and found him in his study." Adams went into the study and carefully examined the scene. Caleb was sitting in a chair in a natural position, with an unfinished cup of coffee nearby. The detective saw no signs of a struggle or violence. "Mrs. Porter, did your husband have any health problems?" he asked, returning to the living room. "No, he was always healthy." Kendra shook her head. "He had regular medical checkups for his work at the church." "What about psychological problems? Depression, suicidal thoughts?" "No, nothing like that," she lied again, not wanting to talk about Caleb's childhood traumas. "Financial difficulties? We're not rich, but we're not poor either, just a normal family with an average income." The detective questioned the neighbors, but no one had seen or heard anything suspicious. The Porter's house was in a quiet neighborhood where all the residents knew each other well and would have noticed any strangers immediately. "Everything was quiet last night," said Mrs. Jones, an elderly woman who lived across the street. "They came back from the wedding around 10 and went into the house. The lights were out by 11:30. Other neighbors confirmed her words. No one heard any screams, noise, or signs of a quarrel. "Caleb was a very quiet young man," Mrs. Jones added. "He always greeted people politely and helped carry bags. It's hard to believe that something happened to him." Adams returned to the house and looked around the study again. On the desk were theology books and several written sheets, apparently drafts of sermons. The computer was turned off. A cup of coffee stood next to Caleb's right hand, the coffee in it cold. "Mrs. Porter, who else had access to your home?" asked the detective. "Sister Rena sometimes comes to visit. Pastor Mitchell, Caleb's mentor, but they don't have keys." "Did anyone come by last night?" "No, we were alone." The paramedics prepared the body for transport. Adams explained to Kendra that Caleb would be taken to the morgue for an autopsy to determine the cause of death. "Most likely it was a heart attack or some other natural cause," he said. "But the procedure is mandatory in all cases of sudden death." "When will the results be ready?" Kendra asked. "In a day or two. I'll contact you as soon as I receive the expert's report." After all the services had left, Kendra was left alone in the empty house. The silence weighed heavily on her, and she didn't know what to do. Should she call Rena, Pastor Mitchell, or just sit and wait for the autopsy results? She decided to call her sister. Rena was the only person close to her who could support her in this situation. "Kendra, what's wrong?" Rena immediately heard something wrong in her sister's voice. "Caleb died," Kendra said with difficulty. "I found him dead this morning." "What? How did it happen?" "I don't know. The police say it might have been a heart attack. The autopsy will be tomorrow." "I'll come over right now," Rena said without hesitation. "Don't stay alone." Kendra hung up the phone and sank back into silence. In one day, her life had been turned upside down twice. First, she learned that her husband had been cheating on her entire life, and now he had died under mysterious circumstances. Detective Adams was inclined to believe it was a natural death, but something bothered Kendra about how calmly Caleb sat in his chair. Detective Trace Adams had a restless night, pondering the circumstances of Caleb Porter's death. In his 20 years on the force, he had seen many sudden deaths, and something about this case bothered him. The deceased sat too calmly in his chair. His posture seemed too natural. Usually, people who die of a heart attack have time to clutch their chest or fall out of their chair, but Caleb looked as if he had simply fallen asleep over a cup of coffee. The next morning, Adams decided to investigate the deceased's identity more thoroughly. He began with a visit to Pastor Jerome Mitchell at St. Luke's Baptist Church. The church was small but well kept, with wooden benches and a simple altar. The pastor received the detective in his modest office, which smelled of old books and wax. "Detective Adams, what a tragedy!" Pastor Mitchell rose from his desk and shook his guest's hand. "I still can't believe Caleb is dead. He got married yesterday and today he's gone." "Tell me about Caleb." Adams settled into a chair across from the pastor's desk. "What kind of man was he? Did he have any enemies or problems?" Pastor Mitchell rubbed his chin thoughtfully. At 55, he looked like a tired man, weighed down by the many concerns of his parishioners. "Caleb was a wonderful young man," he began slowly. "I knew him since childhood, baptized him, watched him grow up. He was a very religious boy, always helping out at church, studying the scriptures. And lately, how was he behaving before his death?" Adams took out his notebook. "To be honest, he seemed a little tense the last few months," the pastor frowned. "He was often nervous, asking the same questions over and over again. I thought it was because of his upcoming wedding." "Did the church have financial problems?" Pastor Mitchell sighed and nodded. "Unfortunately, yes. Our congregation is small, and donations are not always enough to maintain the building and pay staff salaries. Caleb was paid a very modest salary, and I knew it was hard for him, especially after buying a house. Did he complain about money? He didn't complain, but I could see he was worried. I offered to help him several times, but he refused. He was a proud guy. The detective wrote the information down in his notebook. Financial difficulties rarely lead to sudden death, but stress over money could affect one's health. Pastor Mitchell, do you know of any personal problems Caleb had? Maybe something from his past? The pastor paused, clearly thinking about his answer. Caleb was a very withdrawn child, he said finally. He was teased at school, I know that. He often came to me upset, but he didn't give any details. What was he teased about? I don't know exactly. Children can be cruel for no particular reason. Caleb was a quiet boy. Maybe that's why he became a target. Adams understood that the pastor either really didn't know the details or didn't want to reveal them. Clergy often keep their parishioners' secrets. And in the last few days, was Caleb acting any differently than usual? He conducted the service on Sunday. Everything was as usual. True, the sermon was a little disjointed, but I chalked that up to pre-wedding jitters. After talking to the pastor, Adams went to see Rena Holmes. The bride's sister worked at the city clinic, and the detective found her during her lunch break in the hospital cafeteria. Rena looked depressed and tired, with traces of tears in her eyes. Miss Holmes, I'm sorry for your loss. Adams sat down across from her at the table. I know this is a difficult time for you, but I need to ask you a few questions. I understand. Rena wiped her eyes with a napkin. Kendra said you're conducting an investigation. What can you tell me about Caleb? Did you know him well? Rena shook her head. Not very well, to be honest. Kendra met him just a year ago, and I only saw him at family gatherings. He seemed like a nice guy, very polite and well-mannered. And the day before the wedding? Did you talk to him at the celebration? Yes, but nothing special. The usual congratulations. Thanks for the support. He looked happy, though a little nervous. Adams watched Rena's reactions closely. The woman did look upset, but not frightened or guilty. Did you know of any problems Caleb was having, personal or professional? No, nothing like that. Rena shook her head. Kendra never complained. They seemed like a happy couple. What about last night? Did you go to their house after the party? No, I went straight home. I was tired after the day, and I didn't want to disturb the newlyweds on their first night. The detective studied Rena's face, but saw no signs of deception. A medical professional with 6 years of experience, she was accustomed to stressful situations and knew how to control her emotions. Miss Holmes, given your profession, do you know of any substances that can cause sudden death without obvious symptoms? Rena looked at him warily. Why do you ask? Didn't Caleb die of a heart attack? We're looking into all possibilities, Adams replied evasively. It's standard procedure. Well, theoretically, yes, there are such drugs. Some heart medications in large doses, insulin for diabetics, but I don't have access to such substances in dangerous quantities. After talking to Rena, Adams returned to the station where a call from the morgue was waiting for him. Dr. Henderson, the medical examiner, had completed his preliminary examination of Caleb Porter's body. Trace, I have news for you. The doctor's voice sounded serious. This is definitely not a natural death. Adams tensed. What did you find? Cyanide was found in the blood and stomach contents. Quite a large dose. Death occurred quickly, within 10 to 15 minutes after ingestion. Cyanide? Are you sure? Absolutely. The characteristic smell of bitter almonds, changes in the tissues. This is classic cyanide poisoning. Adams felt adrenaline rushing through his veins. A case of sudden death had turned into a murder investigation. Doctor, can you determine how the poison entered the body? Most likely through the stomach. The stomach contents contain traces of coffee with a high concentration of cyanide. Apparently, the poison was mixed into the drink. How much time passed between the ingestion of the poison and death? Given the concentration, I would say 10 to 15 minutes. Caleb drank the poisoned coffee and lost consciousness fairly quickly. His death was relatively peaceful. He simply fell asleep and never woke up again. Adams thanked the expert and immediately drove to the Porter's house. Now he had to tell Kendra that her husband had been murdered and find out who could have mixed the poison into Caleb's coffee. Kendra met the detective in her bathrobe and slippers, her eyes swollen from crying. Next to her was Rena, who had apparently come to support her sister. "Mrs. Porter, I need to inform you of the results of the examination," Adams said as he walked into the living room. "I'm afraid the news is unpleasant." "What happened?" Kendra sat down in an armchair, preparing for the worst. "Your husband was murdered. Cyanide, a powerful poison, was found in his system." Kendra turned even paler, and Rena gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. "Killed? But by whom? Why?" Kendra could barely get the words out. "That's what I'm here to find out," Adams said, taking out his notebook. "Mrs. Porter, I need to ask you some more detailed questions. The poison entered his system through the coffee your husband drank in his office." "But who could have put poison in the coffee?" Kendra looked at the detective in confusion. "Exactly. Tell me in detail about last night. Who made the coffee? Where is the coffee can stored? Who else besides you had access to the kitchen?" Kendra struggled to focus on the questions. "The coffee is in the kitchen cupboard, always in the same place. Caleb made his own coffee every morning. It was his ritual. And the night before, did you make coffee in the evening?" "No, we drank tea after returning from the wedding. No one touched the coffee." "So the poison was mixed in either on Monday evening or early Tuesday morning." Adams wrote down every word. "Who else knew about your husband's habit of drinking coffee in the morning?" Kendra thought for a moment. "Many people. Rena knew Pastor Mitchell came to our house several times and saw it. The neighbors probably knew too. Mrs. Porter, once again, who had access to your home on Monday? Maybe someone came by to help with the wedding preparations?" "Only Rena." Kendra looked at her sister. "She came in the morning to help me get ready." Adams turned to Rena. "Miss Holmes, were you in the house on Monday morning?" "Yes," Rena nodded. "I arrived around 9 in the morning. I helped Kendra with her hair and makeup. Then we went to church together." "Did you go into the kitchen?" "Of course. I made breakfast for Kendra and washed the dishes. The usual stuff." "Did you see the coffee can?" Rena hesitated for a second. "Probably, yes. It's in plain sight." Adams noticed the slight pause in her answer, but didn't press her on it for the moment. "Mrs. Porter, where do you buy your coffee? What time do you usually go shopping?" "At the supermarket near our house. We buy it once a week, usually on Saturdays." "So the coffee can was new?" "Yes, we bought it on the Saturday before the wedding." Adams realized that the circle of suspects was still small. Only someone who had access to the kitchen and knew Caleb's habits. According to Kendra, the only person who fit that description was Rena. "Miss Holmes, given your medical background, do you have access to cyanide or knowledge of where it can be obtained?" Rena shifted nervously in her chair. "Cyanide is not used in normal medical practice. It is an industrial poison used in some branches of chemistry. I don't know where it can be obtained." "But you know how it works?" "Only from textbooks. It is a very dangerous substance that causes rapid death." Adams wrote down the answers and closed his notebook. "Mrs. Porter, Miss Holmes, the investigation will continue. Please do not leave town and report to me any memories that may be relevant to the case." After the detective left, the sisters were left alone. Kendra stared into space, trying to comprehend that her husband had been murdered. Rena nervously fiddled with the edge of her sweater, clearly upset by the interrogation. Detective Adams spent the next 2 days carefully examining all aspects of the Caleb Porter murder case. He double-checked all the witness statements and studied the deceased's financial documents and medical records. Gradually, a picture began to emerge that increasingly focused on one person, Rena Holmes. The first thing that caught the detective's attention was Rena's slight nervousness during the interrogation. A woman accustomed to stressful situations in the hospital, she was noticeably anxious when answering questions about access to poisons. Adams decided to take a closer look at her professional activities. He went to the city clinic where Rena worked and met with the head of the department, Dr. Williams. The elderly doctor, with a kind face, welcomed the detective into his office and willingly talked about his employee. "Rena Holmes? She's an excellent specialist," said Dr. Williams. "She's been with us for 6 years, very responsible and knowledgeable. Patients love her. Colleagues respect her." "Doctor, does Miss Holmes have access to dangerous drugs?" Adams asked. "As a medical technician, she works with various medications but under strict supervision. All drugs are accounted for and constantly monitored. Is cyanide used in your clinic?" The doctor frowned. "Cyanide? No, we don't use it in medical practice. It's an industrial poison. Although..." He paused to think. "What is it?" Adams tensed up. "Last month, we had an inventory of old drugs. We wrote off obsolete drugs, including some chemical reagents that were used for laboratory tests many years ago. Perhaps there could have been cyanide in some of the compounds. Who conducted this inventory?" "Several employees, including Rena. But all discarded drugs had to be destroyed by a special service." Adams asked to see the inventory documents. In the list of discarded drugs, he did indeed find several items that contained cyanide as a component. Rena's signature was on the document confirming the transfer of the drugs for destruction. "Doctor, was there a patient named Caleb Porter at your clinic?" asked the detective. Dr. Williams checked the database on his computer. "Yes, there was. He visited several times this year. The last time was 2 months ago." "What was the reason for his visits?" "Skin problems, chronic diaper rash. The doctor prescribed special ointments and hygiene recommendations." Adams felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. Rena could have seen Caleb's medical records and learned about his problem. In a small clinic, medical technicians often have access to patient records. Could Miss Holmes have seen this patient's chart? Theoretically, yes, if she was helping with paperwork or preparing for the appointment. But that would be a breach of confidentiality. The doctor looked concerned. After leaving the clinic, Adams went to the lab to clarify the details of the examination. Dr. Henderson provided him with additional information about the cyanide found in Caleb's body. "Trace, I've studied the concentration and form of the cyanide in more detail," said the medical examiner. "It was potassium cyanide in crystalline form, dissolved in liquid. A very pure substance, laboratory grade." "So it wasn't homemade poison?" "Definitely not. It's a professional chemical reagent. You can find it in laboratories, hospitals, or chemical plants." Armed with this information, Adams decided to question Rena again. He understood that there was not yet enough direct evidence, but the circumstantial evidence pointed to her. He found Rena at home, in a small apartment on the second floor of a multi-story building. The woman opened the door in her home clothes, looking tired and tense. "Miss Holmes, I need to ask you a few more questions," Adams said as he walked into the living room. "What else do you want to know?" Rena sat down in a chair opposite the sofa where the detective had settled. "Tell me more about Monday. What exactly were you doing at your sister's house?" Rena swallowed nervously. "I arrived in the morning to help Kendra get ready. I did her hair and helped her with her makeup. I made breakfast and cleaned up the kitchen." "And after the wedding? Did you visit the newlyweds?" "No, I told you. I went straight home." "Miss Holmes, there was a patient named Caleb Porter at your clinic. Did you know about that?" Rena paled noticeably. "Perhaps. We have many patients. I don't remember them all." "But you should have remembered this patient. After all, he became your son-in-law." I don't know." Rena's voice trembled. "Miss Holmes, I have information that a month ago, your clinic conducted an inventory of old medications. Among them were chemical reagents containing cyanide." Rena remained silent, clenching her hands into fists. "I know that you participated in this inventory and had access to the drugs being written off. I also know that you could have seen Caleb's medical records and learned about his condition. I don't understand what you're talking about. Rena tried to remain calm. Adams took a photocopy of Caleb's medical records out of his folder. The chart states that he sought treatment for chronic diaper rash caused by constant use of absorbent products. For a medical professional, this is a clear indication of incontinence issues. The rest is easy to guess. Rena lowered her head, and Adams realized he had hit the mark. Miss Holmes, tell me the truth. What did you find out about Caleb, and how did it affect your actions? A long pause hung in the air. Rena struggled with herself, and finally her resistance broke. I accidentally saw his file 2 months ago, she said in a quiet voice. I was preparing documents for the doctor and came across a familiar name. I was curious, so I read it. And what did you understand? That he has a serious problem. A 30-year-old man who wears diapers because of incontinence? That's either a serious illness or a psychological problem. Rena stood up and walked to the window. I started watching him more closely at family gatherings. He always seemed unsure of himself, avoiding physical contact even with Kendra. He never talked about children, even though Kendra dreamed of having a family. And you came to some conclusions? I realized that he wasn't marrying my sister for love. He needed the facade of a normal family life to hide his problems. And Kendra, she's naive, kind. She believed in his game. Adams listened carefully, writing down every word. What made you take such drastic measures? Rena turned to him, her eyes full of tears. My sister lost her parents 3 years ago. She was devastated, barely recovering from her grief. And then this man appeared, who took advantage of her trust and kindness. I couldn't let him ruin her life. Tell me exactly how you poisoned Caleb. Rena returned to her chair and covered her face with her hands. During inventory, I took a bottle of potassium cyanide. I said I would take it to be destroyed, but I hid it at home. I didn't know what I would do. I just wanted to be able to stop him if necessary. And on Monday? When I was at Kendra's in the morning, I saw how happy she was. She was making plans for the future, dreaming of children, of a life together. And I knew it was all a lie. Caleb could never give her a normal family. Rena wiped away her tears. While Kendra was getting ready in her bedroom, I mixed poison into the coffee jar. I knew that Caleb drank coffee in his office every morning. It was his unchanging habit. How much poison did you use? I didn't know the exact dosage. I poured in about half the bottle. I wanted the death to be quick and painless. Adams finished writing and looked at the woman in front of him. Rena Holmes was not a cruel criminal. She was a sister who tried to protect a loved one in the only way she could think of. Miss Holmes, do you understand that murder did not solve your sister's problem? Now she has lost her husband and will soon lose her sister. I know, Rena nodded. But it's better for her to survive her husband's death than to suffer a lifetime of marriage to a man who can't truly love her. Adams called for backup and officially arrested Rena Holmes on charges of first-degree murder. As she was being handcuffed, she asked that her sister be told that she had done it out of love and wanted only the best for her. Later, at the station, while filling out the paperwork, Adams reflected on the motives behind the crime. Rena had indeed tried to protect her sister, but she had chosen the most radical and wrong way to do so. She did not take into account that Kendra had the right to decide her own fate, even if that choice turned out to be painful. The Holmes family's story was a tragedy in its purest form: love, lies, an attempt to protect loved ones, and the catastrophic consequences of a wrong decision. Now Kendra was left alone, having lost both her husband and her sister within a few days.